I still remember the exact moment I said it, as if it was just yesterday. My heart was racing, my mind was all over the place, but somehow the words came out. You're just my backup plan. I didn't mean for it to sound so harsh, but that's how it came out, and there was no going back. It was one of those days where everything felt off. I had just turned 30, and I was at a point in my life where I thought I had it all figured out, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I had a husband, a job, a comfortable apartment in the city. We'd been married for almost 6 years, and from the outside, everything looked perfect. But deep down, I was struggling. I hadn't been happy for a long time. Not really. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did, in a way. But it wasn't the same kind of love I once had for him. I'm sure he could tell something was off too, though we never really talked about it. He wasn't exactly the most emotionally available person, and I wasn't much better at expressing what I was feeling. We'd just gotten into this routine of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. And then there was him. His name was James. I met him about 2 years ago at a work event. I didn't think much of it at first. He was just another guy in the office, someone I occasionally talked to during lunch breaks. But over time, I found myself drawn to him. He was everything my husband wasn't: attentive, charming, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. At first, I told myself I was just being stupid. But the more time I spent with him, the more I started to feel alive again. I started to feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't supposed to happen. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was cheating. But I didn't want to think about it like that. To me, it was more of a connection I was missing. Something I felt like I'd lost with my husband. James filled that gap, and before I knew it, we were meeting up after work, texting late at night, and then one thing led to another. I was scared of what I was doing, but I kept justifying it in my mind. I told myself I was still in a committed marriage. After all, I wasn't planning to leave my husband. I wasn't going to destroy everything, but I was already lying to myself. Looking back, I feel ashamed of how I acted. I remember my husband coming home late from work on that Friday night. He was tired, exhausted from the long week, and I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying not to feel the guilt creeping in. He came up behind me and kissed me on the cheek, and I couldn't even look him in the eyes. I had just spent the last hour texting James, telling him how much I couldn't wait to see him. I had already made up my mind in that moment. I was going to meet James the next day, even though I knew how wrong it was. I had convinced myself I deserved this little piece of happiness. That night, my husband didn't stay long after dinner. We didn't talk much. I could tell he was going through his own stuff. He'd been acting distant for a while too, but I never asked about it. It was just easier not to dig into those things. But the silence felt like a weight on my chest. That was when I said it to him. You're just my backup plan. I can still feel the way his face changed when the words left my mouth. His eyes were wide, like he was trying to process what I had just said. But he didn't say anything. He just stood there, frozen. The silence between us was deafening. And then, without another word, he turned around, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. I didn't chase after him. I didn't beg him to stay or even apologize. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew I was the one who had already checked out. But part of me didn't think he would actually leave. I thought he would stay, like he always did. But he didn't. I stood there, stunned. I wasn't sure what to feel, relieved, scared, angry, or guilty. It was all mixed up inside me, and I didn't know how to process it. I just stared at the door, waiting for him to come back, but he never did. The next few days were a blur. He didn't call, didn't text. I tried to convince myself that he was just giving me space. But I knew he was done, and then it hit me. The moment I realized that everything I had built was slipping through my fingers. I had pushed him too far, said something I couldn't take back. And now, I was left alone with the consequences of my actions. But there was still one thing I had left to hold on to: James. But would he even be there for me? Or had I just ruined that too? I had no idea what was coming next. The first few days after my husband left were pure chaos in my head. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. I'd been so cold and distant, and then I said something so cruel. I mean, who does that? Who says something like that to someone they claim to love? But despite everything, There was this strange sense of relief. I had been living in this constant state of tension for months, even longer. The routine with my husband had become suffocating, and everything I said to him felt hollow. I had been going through the motions, pretending to care, pretending to be happy, while internally, I was already somewhere else. I guess the real truth is, I was emotionally checked out long before that night. I didn't even try to call him at first. I think part of me was still in shock, part of me was angry, and part of me felt like I deserved this. But even when I sat there by myself, there was a gnawing feeling at the back of my mind, reminding me that what I had done was wrong. It wasn't just the words I had said, but the actions that led up to them. That's when I started thinking about James again. Was this my chance? My ticket out? Maybe things could finally be different. Maybe with him, I could feel what I thought I had lost forever. The problem was that even though James had made me feel alive again, there was this weight on my chest when I thought about him. It wasn't the same weight I felt when thinking about my husband. It was something different. A heavier feeling. I had already crossed a line I couldn't uncross, but with James, I felt like I was walking down a path that led to something I couldn't control. It wasn't long before I heard from James, though. It was the afternoon of the third day after my husband left. I had barely slept, my mind swirling between guilt and excitement, and then there it was, a text from him. It was simple, almost casual, but the words hit me harder than I expected. "Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up?" I stared at the message for what felt like forever. My hands were shaking. I wanted to tell him everything, to beg him to help me through this, but I couldn't bring myself to. I didn't know how to ask for his help. I didn't know if he'd even be willing to help me. Was this all a fantasy? Was he just another guy who saw me as someone to fill his own needs, without any real emotional attachment? I felt a cold, uncomfortable wave of clarity wash over me. James wasn't my escape. He wasn't the solution to my problems. At least not in the way I thought he would be. But I still couldn't let go. I couldn't just turn him off like a switch. I had already let myself feel things for him, and now it was too late. I waited an hour before replying. "I'm okay. I'm just figuring things out." That was all I could muster. I wasn't ready to spill everything. Part of me wanted to call him and tell him how much I missed him, how I had messed everything up, but another part of me, one that I didn't want to admit existed, knew I had to face the reality of my situation. That evening, I finally heard from my husband. It was a text, short and blunt. "I took my stuff. I'm not coming back." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I wasn't surprised, but I didn't expect it to feel so real. The finality of it. The silence. It was over. No more pretending. No more dragging out this toxic relationship I had built with him. I don't think I even cried at that point. Not because I didn't care, but because I had been crying for months without even realizing it. Crying on the inside. I had been so miserable in this marriage that when the end finally came, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a release. But then, the guilt hit. It wasn't just that I had hurt him. It was that I had been living a lie for so long. I wasn't the woman I wanted to be. I wasn't the woman I thought I could be. I had sacrificed honesty for comfort, stability, and a sense of security. But what had I gained in return? A life of emptiness, of pretending. The next few days were a blur. I kept thinking about how I could fix things, how I could make it all right. But deep down, I knew there was no fixing this. My husband wasn't coming back, and I had already done enough damage that even if he did, it would never be the same. James kept texting me. He wanted to know how I was holding up. He asked if I wanted to meet up, and each time he reached out, I felt this pull inside of me. Maybe it was just that I didn't want to be alone. Maybe I was looking for a quick fix. Something to fill the space that my husband left behind. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't ready for anything with James. Not really. Not when I was still reeling from the mess I'd created. I decided to meet him. It was like a compulsion. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could make me feel better, even if it was temporary. I didn't know where things were going with him, but at that moment, I didn't care. When we met, he was exactly how I remembered, charming, attentive, and eager to listen. But even as we talked, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was just distracting myself from the truth about who I had become. about what I had done, and about the mess I had made. It was around then that I realized something. I was trying to run from the consequences of my own actions, but no matter how many texts I sent, or how many times I met up with James, I couldn't escape the reality that my life was falling apart, and it was all because of me. There was no way out of it. No one to blame but myself. And yet, I still wasn't ready to face it completely. Not yet. It was around the 4th day, after everything blew up, that I finally broke down. I had spent the last few days pretending I was okay, clinging to the idea that I could just move on, that everything would somehow fix itself. But the truth was, I couldn't avoid it anymore. My life had shattered into pieces, and I was standing in the middle of the mess, pretending like I could just sweep it all under the rug. James and I had met up again. This time it felt different, more like an escape, a distraction than anything else. We had dinner at this little Italian place that we used to go to when things were still light and easy between us. I tried to keep the conversation casual, tried to act like I was okay. But inside, I was crumbling. James must have noticed because he kept asking how I was doing, how I was feeling. But I didn't know how to answer him. What was I supposed to say? I had just ruined my entire life, and now I was here, sitting across from a guy I was having an affair with, pretending like everything was normal. I couldn't keep up the facade anymore. James, I said, my voice shaking, I don't know what to do anymore. I've messed everything up. I don't even know who I am anymore. I've hurt my husband. I've hurt myself. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, but it did. And now I'm just a mess. He reached across the table and grabbed my hand, and for a moment, I thought he would tell me that it would all be okay, that we could fix this. But he didn't. Instead, he said something that made my stomach churn. Look, I'm here for you. I know things are complicated, but we're both adults, right? You don't have to feel guilty about what happened between us. I know you're going through a lot, but I think you need to figure out what you really want, what you really need. That was it. That was the moment I realized everything I had been doing, everything I had been running from, was just a way to avoid facing the truth. I had cheated on my husband. I had hurt him, and deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to move on to anything else, not with James, not with anyone. I was still carrying all this baggage from my marriage, from my own decisions, and I wasn't ready to bring someone else into that mess. I left the restaurant that night feeling more lost than I ever had. I was angry at myself for getting into this situation in the first place. I was angry at James for making me confront the truth. I was angry at my husband for leaving, even though I knew I had pushed him away. But most of all, I was angry at the woman I had become. The woman who had lied, cheated, and taken everything she had for granted. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. I hadn't heard from my husband since his text about taking his things. I knew it was over, but I couldn't shake this overwhelming feeling of regret. I hadn't even tried to apologize to him. I hadn't called. I hadn't said a word since that night. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to face him. I needed to apologize. I needed to tell him I was sorry, even if it didn't change anything. I had to take responsibility for what I'd done, so I called him. He answered on the third ring, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, listening to the silence between us. Finally, I spoke. I'm sorry. I know I can't undo what I did, but I need you to know that I regret everything. I hurt you, and I should never have said those things. I should never have treated you like that. I'm so sorry. There was a long pause on the other end. And then he spoke, but his voice was cold, distant. I don't think you understand what you did, and honestly, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. But I'll say this. You need to figure out what you want. You need to figure out who you really are before you hurt anyone else. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, but it won't be with me. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone, feeling completely empty. His words hit harder than anything else, but I deserved them. I had destroyed everything. I had been selfish, and now there was no fixing it. The guilt that had been gnawing at me for days, no, for months, finally overwhelmed me. I had treated my husband like a backup plan because I was too scared to face my own unhappiness. I had cheated on him because I wanted something more, but I didn't even know what that was. I thought I could fill the emptiness with another person, but it didn't work. It never works. I had spent so much time looking for something outside of myself that I never took the time to figure out what was wrong with me. What had I been avoiding? Why couldn't I just be happy with what I had? I sat there for a long time, my mind racing. But no matter how many times I replayed everything in my head, I couldn't change the outcome. It was too late. My husband was gone. And even if he came back, I knew it would never be the same. Not after everything I had done. I wasn't sure where I went wrong. I had been so focused on the need for excitement, for something that made me feel alive again, that I neglected the person who had always been there for me. I didn't appreciate him until it was too late. I tried to reach out to James again, but I realized I was just looking for a distraction. I didn't want to be alone, but being with him wouldn't fix my problems. It wouldn't fix me. That was the hardest part to accept. I had messed up, and I had to face the consequences. The first step was admitting that I wasn't the person I thought I was. The second step was acknowledging that I had hurt someone I loved, and I didn't know if I could ever make that right. And now, the real work began. Not with James, not with my husband, but with myself. It was time to figure out who I was, what I wanted, and how to heal from the mess I had created. But first, I had to face the hardest truth of all: it was all my fault. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. A week had passed since my phone call with my husband. A week of nothing but silence, and each day it felt like the weight of what I had done was heavier and heavier. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. I couldn't pretend I was fine or tell myself that everything would somehow fix itself. The truth was right there, staring me in the face, and I had to reckon with it. The mess I had created wasn't something I could just sweep away. I spent most of that week in a daze. I didn't go out much, just stayed in my apartment, replaying everything over and over again. I had been so stupid, so reckless. What was I thinking? That I could get away with hurting the one person who had been there for me through everything. I tried reaching out to James a couple of times. I thought maybe if I talked to him, it would help me understand my feelings, help me make sense of the mess I had made. But every time I tried to text or call, I kept second guessing myself. Was I looking for comfort? Or was I just trying to distract myself from the overwhelming guilt that seemed to consume me? I needed to stop running from this. It hit me one afternoon when I was sitting on my couch, staring blankly at the TV. I had no idea what was on the screen. I wasn't even watching, but I was too tired to get up, too lost in my thoughts to care. I realized I hadn't even thought about what I truly wanted. I had been living in this emotional fog for so long that I didn't know what it was like to make a decision based on myself. I had always relied on other people to make me feel whole. My husband, then James. But I never stopped to ask myself what I needed, what I wanted. That night I made a decision. I needed to find a way to move forward, to face the consequences of my actions and rebuild from the ground up. But it wasn't going to be easy. The hardest part, I realized, wasn't just apologizing to my husband or letting go of James. It was learning to forgive myself. I decided I needed to see a therapist. It felt like the right step, but at the same time, it felt like an admission of failure. Like I was finally acknowledging how badly I had messed things up. But deep down, I knew it was the only way to stop this cycle of guilt, confusion, and regret. I didn't know where else to turn. I couldn't keep bottling all these emotions inside. When I made the appointment, I felt a small sense of relief. It was the first step towards healing. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something proactive about the wreckage I had caused. In the meantime, I decided to give my husband some space. I knew he didn't want to hear from me, and I knew he didn't owe me anything. But I couldn't just sit here, waiting for him to fix everything. I had to face the reality of the situation. I had to fix it, even if that meant never getting him back. The next few days were a strange mix of emotions. I started going out more, trying to rebuild some semblance of a life that didn't involve the constant weight of guilt hanging over me. I reached out to friends, though it was awkward. Most of them knew what had happened, and I didn't know how to talk about it. There were no easy words for what I had done, no quick fixes. I did start to see the cracks in myself. The way I had always chosen the easy way out, the way I had been afraid to face the truth for so long. I saw now how I had allowed my own insecurities, my own need for validation, to drive me to make decisions I wasn't proud of. It wasn't about my husband or James. It was about me and my inability to confront what was wrong within myself. Then, one afternoon, I got an unexpected text. It was from my husband. "I've been thinking. I'm not sure what the future holds for us, but I think we need to talk. When you're ready." It felt like a punch to the stomach, and a ray of hope all at once. I knew that reaching out like this was huge for him. He was trying to open a door I had slammed shut, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to walk through it. Part of me wanted to text back right away, to beg for his forgiveness, to try to explain myself. But another part of me knew that wasn't the way to go. I wasn't just trying to get him back. I was trying to figure out what I needed first. What I had learned in the past week was that I couldn't keep running from myself from the truth. So, I took a breath. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I focused on my therapy. It was grueling, painful work, but it was what I needed. In those sessions, I started to understand the deeper reasons behind my actions: the fear of being trapped, the fear of being invisible, the need to feel valued. I realized how much of my identity I had wrapped up in being someone else's. I had let myself fade into the background of my own life, waiting for someone else to make me feel worthy. And the more I understood that, the more I realized how badly I had treated my husband, how unfair it had been for me to use him as a safety net, a backup plan. After a few days, I finally responded to his text. "I'm ready. Let's talk." It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a plea for him to take me back. It was just the beginning of what needed to be a long conversation about what had happened and where we both stood now. I didn't expect him to forgive me immediately, or ever really. But I needed to take responsibility for what I had done. I owed him that much, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. The journey ahead would be long. I had no illusions about that, but it was the only path forward. I had broken everything, and I knew it was going to take time to rebuild, not just my relationship with my husband, but with myself. There was no quick fix, no magic answer, just the slow, painful work of owning up to the mess I had made and finding a way to heal. But I was ready to try.